Hello, my name is Olivia Carlisle, and this is my PowerPoint presentation called Perceptions and Culture for the class Social Psychology 202A. What is web-based social cognition? Web-based social cognition are cues online that are used to form initial impressions of others. This is prompted by the growing use of technology. More and more people are meeting for the first time over the internet, over Zoom or over FaceTime or whatever it might be. And those first impressions online are still used to form an initial impression of someone, just as a face-to-face, more standard meeting would do. Web-based social cognition, a study showed that first impressions formed in response to real-world observations are consistent with impressions based on web page information. So what this study showed is that real-world first impressions, where you're meeting someone face-to-face and you're shaking their hand and all of that, those observations are consistent with a first impression gathered from a web page or a online meeting, whether that be somebody's social media or whether that be meeting them over Zoom or FaceTime or whatever that might be. This study showed that first impressions in person and first impressions online are consistent impressions. What are culture perceptions? Different cultures portray emotions in different ways. What we perceive as normal is not normal in many cultures. So what we perceive as Americans to be completely normal in our culture might be viewed as a Norwegian or a Russian or any other type of culture. What we perceive as something being totally normal, they might think is absolutely bonkers and not normal at all. Culture perception, we may assume that someone is not interested in us when they simply react or show emotion differently. So we might be telling somebody a story and they might be sitting there with a blank face, no emotion whatsoever. And based off of that interaction, we might assume that this person who's listening to our story is not interested, has no interest, is not even potentially listening to what we're saying. And we're gathering all of this from a facial expression or body language. However, this person may be from a culture where it's not normal to show emotion in your face or to show a reaction. Instead, you wait until the other person is done speaking and then you speak, and that's how you share your reaction. Another culture perception is that some cultures define close friendships as someone you talk to all the time, and others define friendship as someone you can sit with and be silent comfortably. Cultural differences. Everyone sees the world through cultural glasses. It is not about what you see, but what you perceive. So everything that you see through the lens of your cultural glasses. You perceive it as different or strange or weird if it's something that you're not used to in your own culture. So for the culture differences portion, I chose to research Russian culture. Russian culture is very fascinating to me, but it's also a culture that I don't have a lot of knowledge of, and I knew going into it that I already had some perceptions of Russian culture, and so I wanted to see if those perceptions were true or false, and also what the main differences between American culture and Russian culture were. So the first difference I noticed was that American culture tends to look down on couples with large age gaps. So romantic couples with large age gaps, whether that's a younger girl and an older man or a younger man and an older woman. As a culture and as a society, we tend to kind of look down on those couples and think that that's abnormal. However, in Russian culture, large age gaps in romantic relationships are considered normal. In fact, young women are encouraged to go after older men because they're considered more financially stable, more mature, they have their life together, probably much more so than the average young man. And I think that's just that's across the board in a lot of cultures. Another culture difference is Americans prefer a decent amount of personal space, 3 to 4 feet of space on average while holding a conversation, and it is considered rude to be in someone's face while speaking. Typically, Americans, they'll go in for a greeting, a hug, whatever that might be, and then they step back 3 to 4 feet, and that's how they continue with the conversation. And if you're in someone's face while you're speaking, it's generally because you're arguing or you're fighting, or it's not just a conversation. However, Russians prefer less personal space, typically 1 to 2 feet of personal space while holding a conversation. Russians consider it rude if the person they are speaking to tries to back away and get more personal space. So the Russians will go in for their greeting. The women usually, it's a kiss on the cheek. The men will go in for their handshake, a hug, and then they only will step back 1 to 2 feet and hold a conversation. Friendship is another cultural difference. Typically, Americans become friends first and build trust later. Americans also have an easier time cutting friends off. Russians prefer to build trust and honesty before they become friends with someone. Russians believe in building friendships and staying connected. Surprising cultural differences. One thing that was surprising to me was the difference between Russian and American friendships. I'd always thought Russians were somewhat cold and did not put as much stock or weight in friendships as Americans do. However, my research showed that Russians simply just like to take their time and build their friendships up over time, more of a gradual friendship. Another difference that surprised me was the personal space dilemma. Russians like to stand very close to each other while they hold conversations, and that was something I did not know and was surprised by. Cultural difference conclusions. Doing this research has slightly altered my perception of the Russian culture. I previously held a perception that Russians were somewhat distant and emotionally cold as a culture. I also thought that Russian romantic relationships were usually like American relationships, where the typical age gap is a few years apart. This research has helped me to view the Russian culture as different, but not bad. It has also shown me a different way of thinking and an insight into how the Russian culture operates. And then here are my references.